Hey, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another session of EI Live K-12 for students and educators. So my name is Cassie, and I direct educational and outreach activities at the Earth Institute at Columbia University. For those of you who are joining us for the first time and aren't familiar with the Earth Institute, our core mission is to foster a greater understanding of the science behind climate change and sustainability and what we as global citizens can do. So experts that make up the Earth Institute actually include quite a wide range of individuals, including economists, business and policy experts, specialists in public health and law, and of course, earth and environmental scientists. The Institute is actually made up of more than 24 or so research centers and several hundred people who collaborate across many different departments and disciplines at Columbia. So what we're hoping to do with these EI Live K-12 sessions is to introduce you to our interdisciplinary work. Sorry for all the background noise here, through our scientific experts. So we're going to have weekly sessions of these until June. And if you'd like any information about our upcoming sessions, please don't hesitate to contact me directly. You have my email as you got the reminder email for this event. So today we're very lucky to have Dannie Dinh with us from the International Research Institute for Climate and Society, which is one of the largest centers that's part of the Earth Institute. She's going to be speaking to us about climate change impacts in cities and what can be done about those impacts in cities to make those cities more resilient. And after Dannie is done, so she's going to probably take about closer to 30 minutes or so to do her presentation, and then she's going to hand it over to another special guest we have today, Rosalba from NASA GISS, who's going to share some resources, additional resources for all our viewers that's related to what's happening with respect to climate change impacts in cities. So today we're going to be using the Q&A box, not the chat box, and we're not going to be doing any raised hand type of function. So if you do have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to type it into the Q&A box. We'll definitely keep track of those and answer any questions that the audience has. So without further ado, Dannie, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Thanks for the introduction, Cassie, and for organizing. My name is Dannie, and I'm really excited to walk you through this sort of combination of my passion, which is not only to explore the science, but to apply creative thinking and creative skills to envision, how we can apply science in real life and hopefully create a better world for everybody. And that's why this session is called Constructing Climate Conscious Cities. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So we have a mix, I think a mixed bag of backgrounds and people learning at different various stages and disciplines. So bear with me if you've already seen a lot of this before, but if not, please feel free to type your question into the chat box, and I will definitely be happy to address or answer for any of your questions that way. So what is climate change? In order to discuss the solutions, we have to sort of revisit the problem a little bit. As you may already be aware that climate change is largely the impacts of the increased emissions of greenhouse gases, and one of those biggest concentration is carbon dioxide. So there's also methane and water vapor and other gases that also have the same warming effect, but and each of them have this sort of natural cycle, the way that they sort of move through the atmosphere to land, air, us humans, animals, the ecosystem. And this has been ongoing for since the beginning of life. But with human activities, we tend to produce an excess amount of carbon dioxide as well as other greenhouse gases like methane, because we have other activities that consume fossil fuels in order to combust and produce energy for the electricity we use in the cars we drive, etc. And so this sort of tipped the system into overdrive, and that's how you end up with the increased concentration of these gases in the atmosphere instead of in other places within the cycle, or what you would call reservoirs. And so we have this blanket of air that surrounds the Earth. And normally they exist. And the reason it exists is that it actually serves, the existence of life on Earth. It makes it warm enough so that we can inhabit on this planet. But when you have too much gas trapped in this blanket, you end up trapping the solar radiation, and therefore the Earth is warmed beyond what it needed to. And so it sort of just incrementally increases the temperature. More water will vaporize under this increased warming, and then water vapor itself is also contributing to warming. So you just sort of have this runaway. Climate change is just kind of cascade from there. And how do we know this? In the 1950s, Charles Keeling, he decided to measure the amount of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, for example, in one of the observatory station in Hawaii. And thanks to that, we actually have a record of how much a greenhouse gas like carbon dioxide has been in the atmosphere year after year. And as you see from this chart, it's famously called the Keeling curve. Even though there's natural fluctuation due to seasons like spring and summer and winter, we see this very clear increasing trend. And then when you add that to the records of global temperatures over time, you really see the correlation, how it really pair up almost perfectly. And we only, for a long time, CO2, carbon dioxide emission was pretty stable. But in the 1880s, there was clearly a global event that sort of helped tip this line up so that it increased dramatically. And I was wondering if anyone could type in the chat box to suggest what you think this global event or invention or some kind of like human activity that might have caused this.
Please use the Q&A box, not the chat box.
Sorry, Q&A box.
You're good.
Cassie, I don't think I can.
Oh, I'm sorry, you can't see it. So Nathan says the Industrial Revolution.
Yep, that is right. I think, we have always learned how to use, trees for fire, warm, and for heating. But with the Industrial Revolution, the invention of machinery and electricity and all of these other sort of industrial age technology, that's really when we started to see this influx of carbon of combustion, and then also the resulting gases. So when we talk about climate change, a lot of times, we tend to hear about like the Arctic is melting, the animals are losing their habitats, where there are species that are going extinct. And they're really just, a fraction of what is happening, because, you and I were living in our homes, in our cities. There are people living in their countries in doing like working, studying. They are being affected right now by climate change, not just, animals in faraway places that you wish to visit one day, but it's happening all over the world. When you have warming across the planet, there's more water vaporized due to the higher temperature, And you will see this if you set out a bowl of water outside on a sunny day. You see the rate of increase is a lot greater than if you were setting it out on a cooler or less sunny day. And then all of these extra moisture in the air, it turns into, combined with wind and other forces, it turns into excess, precipitation that could fall down and make landfall somewhere, along the coast or even further inland. And that's how you end up with hurricanes and monsoon season in Southeast Asia. So when you have water vapor picking up in one place and moving it elsewhere, there's bound to be trouble. This picture, which is from September of last year in Vietnam. And this region, the central Vietnam, always gets some sort of heavy rainfall monsoon season. But this past year in particular was extra devastating. Over 100 people lost their lives. There was a lot of landslide and flooding that lasted for days and weeks. And it's a problem that it's not going to go away. And then when you have all of this water in one part of the earth, there's also water missing in other parts of the earth. Over Australia and California, you see massive droughts that happen concurrently with other parts of the world receiving excess precipitation. And when you have long ongoing droughts, even the trees and the animals that have adapted to living in drier areas, they don't necessarily have a chance at survival anymore. And that's not just wild animals, but also farm animals and farmers who are trying to grow the crops to support their family, to produce an income for a living, and also to feed the rest of us, who would then purchase those crop products. And then you might remember early last year, there were massive wildfires taking over, consuming California. And it really an event that happens every year during the dry season because there's lack of moisture. So all of the trees and the bushes becomes just fuel, that's just waiting for a spark or someone throw a cigarette or a lightning storm, anything that could spark, and everything would just burn. So it's a host of problems that are associated with climate change. It's not just about temperature increase. You really see, a lot of intensity increase in the catastrophic events, and also the number of catastrophic events also increase. So what do we do about this? I want to turn the solutions into 3 categories. First, you have prevention. You want to prevent a problem from ever happening, but clearly we're a little bit late for that now. It's already ongoing. So then we move to the second stage, which is mitigation. You want to reduce, the activities and the causes that are contributing to the problem. And then during all of that, you also want to be able to adapt. If storms are already happening at a higher rate, it's already increasing in intensity. Droughts are happening, impacting people's lives. Sea level is rising. How do we make sure that we can live with these impacts as they happen, and concurrently prevent more devastating impacts down the line? So it's not just about my generation, about you, but also your children, your grandchildren. We want to make sure that we are being responsible for the long run if we want to preserve life on Earth for a while to come. And when you want to address an issue, you also want to see what are the biggest contributions, what are the biggest area that you could make an impact. And this chart is a lot, but I want you to focus first on the first column. So that's breaking down energy consumption and greenhouse gas emission by sector. So you have the big blue bar, which is energy, electricity, so heating in your home during the winter, heating the water that you take a shower with, and turning on the lights. And then also transportation. How do you get around? How do you go to school? How do you go to your grandma's house? And then when you break it down further, the biggest bar that you see in the middle is orange. And as you see, we can see is residential building, about 11%. We have commercial buildings, so Walmart or any kind of the mall, all of these structures. And we have food and tobacco, it's a very small percentage, and then petroleum chemical production, that's also falling within fossil fuels and other industrial input. So, and then moving on to, so if you can sort of circle and think about which are the biggest contribution, to the problem we have, then maybe we can address it more adequately. And we, as slowly and late as we are to the game, there are a lot of actions that have already been taken, that have already been in the plan, that we are hoping to achieve in the near future. And it is not just at home, doing your own parts of of your daily routine, like recycling and shutting off the water when you're not using it, but also in your community. What can people within a neighborhood do? What can a city accomplish? And then as a country, how do we create policy and sort of like mobilize people around an action plan? And then each of these countries around the world, how can we come together and create a plan to actually get us out of this crisis? So I want to bring you to some examples all around the world. For example, we have bicycle and other transportation means that are a lot more efficient, doesn't require as much fossil fuel input, or for the case of bicycle, it's entirely your own energy that you're putting in, so you're not producing any greenhouse gas emission. So in a crowded city, you want to make sure that people can get around without having to resort to their car, because more cars on the road burning gasoline and diesel is going to produce more greenhouse gas emission. But we also have an increase in electric cars now. And I can imagine if you're driving down the road with your parents, you might see a lot of hybrid or fully electric vehicles on the street now. They're not as rare anymore compared to when I was growing up. And even, and they're continually being improved. The battery used to take a very long time to charge. Now, the new technology can make them fully charged in 5 minutes, which is basically the same amount of time it would take to pull into a gas station to fill up the tank. And how do we fuel the electric cars? We can rely on renewable energy that doesn't require digging into the earth and unearthing these materials like fuels and coals and then burning them, because the combustion process is what produces the greenhouse gases, right? So we see more and more solar and wind and a variety of other sources of renewable energies are being used and deployed right now all over the world. And initially, the cost was always higher. It's less common, so it becomes more expensive. But now the cost is dropping, and more investments are being poured in to support the growth of renewable energy. And so it's already a significant percentage of our energy portfolio right now, which is the sources of where our energy comes from. In Europe and some countries are pledging so that they would be entirely dependent upon renewable energy sources instead of fossil fuels. So that's very promising, and we are headed to that future now. And this is kind of like big and scary in the background when you see these plumes of smoke coming out from the towers, but it's actually just water vapors. It's not toxic fumes or greenhouse gases. I mean, vapor is a greenhouse gas, right? But it's not quite as bad. So this is a photo of Iceland, where most of their energy production actually comes from geothermal. So harvesting the natural energy that they have. They have a lot of volcanoes and sort of higher temperature activities going underground. So they send water down to get it steamed up and then send it back to the surface where it heats homes. It heats the showers, provides general home electricity, as well as snow, melt all the snow on the roads in the winter. It's really cool. Iceland is a small country, but that's what they've been able to achieve. Just with a lot of infrastructure planning and targeting that goal. So now let's move on to another sector that actually is extremely relevant, because when climate change happens, it doesn't just happen, it doesn't just impact us in the way that we're uncomfortable going outside and in the summer. Is also affecting the food that we eat, or the food that's being grown to feed us. And so how can we more sustainably grow food, given that temperature is increasing? There's going to be more harsh events like heavy rainstorm that might destroy the crops, or heavy drought that's going to create crop failure. How do we plan around that? How we can sustain agriculture, not just in the US, and other industrial countries where you can irrigate and maintain the crops at a wide scale, but also in developing countries where these farms are very small and it relies on rain-fed agriculture. And then, another area I mentioned earlier is production. We consume a lot of things. So how can we make sure that we buy less, that we use less, so that they don't have to be produced in the first place? And then we try to circulate it, within the people that need it. When we no longer need it, we can pass it on to someone else. Or when we produce something, we try to do it in the most sustainable, green, environmentally friendly as possible. Protecting the nature, the natural habitats that we have is important, because as you know, the forests are kind of like our lungs. They soak up all of the greenhouse gases, and then they produce clean oxygen for us to breathe. But it's not just a matter of saying, okay, we put a fence around it and no one goes in or out, so we can save it. There are actually people that live in this forest, or live around communities that live around them, that rely on the forest in order to support their livelihood. So how can you sort of balance between protecting the environment, the natural habitat, but also support the people who live there, who rely on it in order to raise their family or produce food. And when you're talking about food, how do you get the food to people? When you live in a city, or when you live far in a more rural suburb area, how can we make sure that we get the food to the people that live there? Especially if they're stranded and they work a different type of job, so they're not growing their own food. How can we make sure to maintain equity and accessibility when we're talking about sustainable agriculture and reducing carbon emission? So a few more examples, and then we'll get to the fun part. This is an example of New York City creating a natural habitat, which is a sort of like a marshland where the water sort of go in and out, but all of the vegetation there are adapted to survive, to feed birds and other wildlife, but also they can thrive, when flood water come in and submerge the entire region. And this works because New York City was originally this big old area of marshland before it was concrete was poured over and all the skyscrapers came up. So a very strange solution to preventing the flood is not to build a wall, but actually to create this area where water can actually come in and out. And it's been proven to be quite effective, especially in the big events like a hurricane. A few years ago, there was Hurricane Sandy that came in and wreaked havoc in the city, and just sort of forced people to realize, the risk and try to address it more adequately. And then if you're in the middle of the ocean, like Malaysia and Indonesia, you don't really have a lot of places to retreat to when the flood water comes. So what they do is that they drafted this crazy plan to move an entire city. And so there is this plan to move the capital of Indonesia from right at the coast to further inland or a higher location where it would be less impacted if a big storm or the rising sea level would occur. And I actually worked with a researcher that have this crazy technology where you can grow crops with ocean water. And the reason we don't use the big vast ocean is because of the salinity that doesn't support most of the crops that we produce. But with a little bit of crossbreeding and engineering the crop seed, they have been able to produce a variety of rice that can actually grow by taking up salt water. And that is huge. And it's just in the lab right now, but imagine what impact it could make if this were, to be implemented wide scale all over the world. And then there's this crazy tower that someone chalked up that is not just a place that you live and work and spend your time, but there's space to grow food. There's space to for leisurely activities, but also the building itself is a air filtration system. So it's purifying the air as it's just sitting there, supporting all of your activities. And then I actually was very happy to put this list together for you. Just a few good news that with regards to environmental climate policy updates that have happened since the new administration have taken office. We now rejoined the Paris Agreement. There's a lot of emphasis on, focusing on climate as a national crisis that requires urgent actions, and then there's also a lot of emphasis on environmental justice, making sure that we're protecting all of the communities, especially the one that's most at risk, rather than just the affluent ones or people with a lot of money who can sort of buy the protection for themselves. And there's a lot of sort of pooling of community ideas and inventions. The Civilian Climate Corps, for example, is such an exciting idea that if you have solutions for sustainable agriculture or some kind of new technology like the rice variety that I just mentioned, then you can actually sort of support, submit your idea and your invention in order to receive funding and support and grow it bigger. So drawing your city, your dream city during this exercise is also a way of crowdsourcing and hopefully one day it will contribute to a bigger plan. So I think we are ready to get into the fun drawing parts. I have provided you with a number of templates. So these sort of are just my 4 examples that I could think of, of where people might live and what our environment might look like. So first you have this area that's more rural. It's in the mountains. It has a lot of forested nature. It's very quiet. There's not a lot of people around. And then in the second one, you have a little bit more of a resemblance of a community. It might be a smaller village. It might be a couple of houses that are sparse and further apart. Number 3 is a classic city, metropolitan area like New York City, where you have a lot of tall, big buildings kind of crunch up together. And it's very accessible. You have bridges and roads, and so it's not difficult to get around. And then 4 is sort of more industrialized. If you ever drive through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, you see a lot of these big, massive plants, and they might be energy plants or chemical production plants or factories. And so the people might live further out and they drive in to work. But because of the massive scale of production, they needed a lot of flat, cleared out land. There's not a lot of trees around. It's not very pleasant looking. But yeah, so I want Cassie to, can you help me put up the first poll? Can you share what your current environment right now, where you're sitting, what does it most closely resemble from the 4 examples that I just gave? It might not be exactly, but it might be a little bit more closely resembling one of these than the others.
Great. So it looks like so far, most of the responses are coming in as number 3.
Okay.
And with a couple of responses as number 2.
That's great. I think it's definitely skewered our responses that were based in near and around New York. But if you're across the river, that's where the IRI in Lamont is located. That's where I used to go to work until last year. It's a little bit more like number 2, where you see the trees and you see the nature, the river, the beauty, but you still sort of have your community, your stores you can still get to. All right, so let's get to number 2, question 2. So with that in mind, I want to know what you want to see the future city to resemble. Out of these 4, what do you think, or what do you foresee the future city is going to look like?
So Danny, can you remind us from 1 to 4 what these are again?
So 1 is more, I think of like the Pacific Northwest and Canada, and near all of the national parks where you see a lot of forested area. And then 2 is, you can drive, you can walk to, the park. There's a lot of trees and natural habitats looking, but you still have your community. You have the stores and the neighbors that you visit. And then 3 is a classic New York City scenario, a big sprawling metropolitan area with a lot of tall, big buildings all crunched up together. And then 4 is more of an industrialized area where you kind of see mostly just manufacturing and production of energy or chemicals or other products that we use. So big warehouses.
All right, so it seems like most of the answers are still, I think, given the responses to the first question, most people have responded to 3 as well.
Okay.
And then we have a couple for number 2, and then a few for number 1.
Yeah.
We also have a question, so I think let's pause to answer that question. The question is whether or not it's, I guess, you feel climate change as much if you're high in the air. Higher in the atmosphere. What does that mean? Are you experiencing the same effect? Which is an interesting question.
Yeah, I think so. I think well, it depends on how often you stay up there and and whether you come down at all, right? So I think what you mean to ask, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you live in a highland region, maybe like on the mountains, on the slope, on the hillside, would you feel climate change as much? And surely, maybe you don't feel the hot temperature that a lot of us within the city or in like the a tropical area might feel. But climate change is more than just temperature. It's about rainfall. It's about the winter. It's about the snowfall that you receive. It's a lot of different factors. So even if you don't feel higher temperature, you might feel a shorter winter, or you might feel that the heavy storms, winter storms that you receive, it's more intense and it comes more frequently and it comes earlier, etc. So, like for example, since a lot of people are in the New York area, we just got a big heavy dump of snow earlier this week, and we're going to get some more later this weekend and next week. Does that mean that climate change doesn't exist? Not necessarily, because as you may recall from earlier, when the water is being picked up over the ocean and is moved to another area, it comes down as precipitation, and that could be rainfall in warmer area, or it could be snowfall in colder area. And overall, when we average all of the temperatures around the world, the last 10 years have, I think the last 15 years, the top 10 hottest year, warmest year that we've ever recorded on planet Earth have all occurred within the last 2 decades. So since late 1990s through the 2000s until now. So just think about that, of all of the years that we've lived until, or even before humans, all the years that we have had a record of Earth temperature, the last 2 decades, 20 years, have all been up there in the top 10 of the warmest years ever. So yeah, even if you don't feel that it's getting hot, it's still, the temperature might change, the precipitation might change, and the disasters like drought, wildfire, and flooding might still occur.
Okay. Great, thank you. So I just want to be aware of the time, Danny. I'm going to turn it over to Rosalba. Danny, if you could stop sharing your screen, I just want to make sure Rosalba gets a chance to share some resources. There's also a question in the Q&A box, Danny. If you can see it now once you've stopped sharing your screen, if you wouldn't mind answering that by typing the answer, and then we'll come back to you in a little bit. Or if you just want to share your other screen and kind of show us what you're doing while Rosalba is talking, that'd be great. Thanks.
Maybe Rosalba also needs to share a screen. So
yeah,
after
she does. Sorry.
I can go ahead and share mine.
Thank you, Cassie, and thank you, Danny. That was a great presentation. I had fun. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share some supplemental resources. My name is Rosalba Gerratano. I help support the Office of STEM Engagement at NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. And I am going to share my screen. Okay. I hope you can see my screen now. Okay. So yeah, so there are 3 resources that I would like to highlight today that are very closely related to climate change. So the first one is called Earth Observatory Kits, the second one is GLOW, and the third one is My NASA Data. So Earth Observatory, or EO Kits, it's kind of like an electronic magazine. So you can subscribe to it, of course, for free. And it is written for audiences ages 9 to 14. It is published with support from different NASA missions. And so there you will find stories, do-it-yourself projects, videos, satellite images, and much more. So on my screen, I am highlighting just one edition of it that had to do with urban heat islands or hot times in the city. So they're actually talking about New York City in particular. And so I decided to highlight this one because that is one of the facets of climate change that we can relate to here in New York City a lot. So they walk you through what an urban heat island is, an experiment in just simply you can, for example, put your hand on, like if you're in a parking lot that is surrounded by grass, you could put your hand on the cement and your hand on the grass and then feel the difference in the temperature. And then they will walk you through, projects and explain more about what the urban heat island is and about some of the things that we can do in a city to mitigate the extreme heat. The next resource that I would like to highlight is GLOBE. So this is an international science education program. And so it lets students, teachers, and the public in general to contribute to science and collaborate with real scientists at NASA and other institutions. And so they have different protocols. So you can study different aspects of Earth science. And so, for example, one of them is surface temperature, which again is related to the urban heat island effect, something that in New York City we experiment. And so right now there's an urban heat island campaign in this GLOBE program. So something else to check out. And the third resource that I would like to share, this is especially for teachers. So it's called My NASA Data. And so it's a compilation of lesson plans, story maps, activities, and much more. It's for grades 3 to 12. And it helps support students analyze and interpret real NASA mission data. So a great resource. All these links to the resource will be added to the Earth Institute's website. So I hope that you will check them out. And that's it. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Rosalba. And as Rosalba said, we will definitely be sharing all of these resources after the session is over. What we'll do is share a recording of the session with everyone, and we're also going to share the link where that recording will live, and that will be where we put all of the great resources that Rosalba has talked about. So Danny, if you want to go ahead and just kind of give us maybe perhaps the 5 minutes to look at your some of what you've done with the templates and sketches. Rosalba, I think there might also be a question for you in terms of urban heat islands in the Q&A box. So if you have a chance to take a look at that, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, Danny, can you hear us? Oops.
Yes, I can hear you. Okay.
Perfect.
You can pin the video. So I actually don't have a printer at home. So I wasn't able to print out the template, but I just grabbed a random drawing that I have. And so I wanted to show you roughly what I've done. So I have these as like sort of like this big art sculptures in the middle of my city. And I wanted to center this because as a sort of like a reminder, of what we're trying to support and what we're trying to preserve. And then all around, you might see some of these buildings. I like the fact that, living in New York, you can get from one place to another very easily on foot or on public transportation or bicycle. And so I want the city to be sort of connected in a way that you can easily get around. You may live in one of these buildings and then you can work in another building. This one I haven't drawn out fully, but I envision it as sort of a residential building with a center that is hollow where you can grow a lot of trees and maybe even garden a lot of food crops and food trees. And then that way you have a lot of access to clean air and also vegetable that you can distribute within your neighborhood. And then I envision another crazy looking building right here that would catch rainfall and use that and run it through a filtration system so that it can supply the water to the residents nearby. And I moved the road up into high air. So you still have some sort of path that is, supporting big trucks and delivery vehicles, but most of people will probably be taking the trains from far away to get into the city. And then on this path, you can also have bicycles and walking path. And then because all of the cities are sort of concentrated, most people live here, we are able to preserve the woodlands and the mountains and a lot of natural habitat so that they're undisturbed, they're still connected, they provide a healthy habitat for the ecosystems there. And we can still enjoy them by, very responsible ecotourism. So you can go there on the weekends or when you can take time off, but for the most part, we leave them undisturbed. And this out here, when I color, it would be representing the ocean. So this is a coastal city. And I would put in a lot of wind turbines out in the further in the ocean, in the open water area that would harvest the energy and connect it to a battery that would then send the energy back into for consumption back in the city. And then there's some marshland that will exist right along the coastline. It should provide more habitats for birds and water and birds and fish and other animals, but it also should be enjoyable recreational area for the people in the city to visit and learn about the environment as well. So that's something that I've sort of roughly drafted. And I would be really excited if anyone have an idea that they want to share, maybe type it into the Q&A.
Great. Yeah, if you do have any ideas that you'd like to share in terms of what you would like to see, or if you'd also like to work with the templates that we had shared before the session with us afterwards, that would be great. We'd love to see some of the work. There is some really great, and as Danny has mentioned, and Mary has just written as well, there's a lot of great innovation going on, city level, at the state level, as well as federally, with sort of urban heat islands. I think a couple years ago, maybe it was longer now, painting roofs in New York City white instead of black to try to keep them cool, having essentially cooling centers set up. And I think, Rosalba, did you answer this sort of question about the percentage of temperature cooled in urban cities?
Yes, we were discussing that recently. I don't think it has been as significant. However, the air quality has improved. Research does show air pollution has decreased.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think while the heat might not have changed, I heard a couple of sessions ago, someone was talking about, while traffic may have, there was less traffic, particularly last March to sort of April, where we were in that initial lockdown, while there was a reduction in car traffic, there actually wasn't that much of a reduction in terms of, I think it was CO2 in the air, but mostly because it was from manufacturing or heating plants and also power plants, because a lot of the infrastructure in New York City is quite old, particularly in New York City. But it would be interesting to also see and think about whether or not there were changes elsewhere in not just urban centers, but to look at, have changes happened in more rural areas, or sort of somewhere in between a rural area and New York City, which is a very unique sort of situation in case. So I see Danny continuing to sort of draw and color away, and I'd love to have everyone who's on this think about ways and things you would like to see in your future city, and imagining what that might look like. And if you had the power to design that, what would you do? And check out the NASA resources as well, to look at what scientists are trying to do and what they have done and what's worked and best practices. So I think that we are out of time, and apologies for running a little bit late, but if you do have questions, feel free to email me directly and we'll pass them along to our presenters. Danny, is there anything else you want to share? We still see your drawing, so.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. I think I'll try to finish this, and if you want to see it, and send us an email and I'll share it. But I would love to see your drawing. And I've sent us, I think Cassie has attached some of the examples in the emails that we sent out. But I also just love, because I actually keep a lot of these drawings that I've received from people, and they're so colorful, but also super innovative. So I would love to see yours. Please do send them my way. And if you're not a drawer, you're not someone who likes to use color pencils, put them in a Google Doc and then paste photos that you found on the internet, and then write out the description. That's called collaging. That's also another way to achieve the same result. So thank you so much. I'm so happy to have all of you sort of sharing in and ask questions. Please send questions and drawings our way. And I hope you reach out to us anytime.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Danny, and thank you, Rosalba, for both of your time and joining us today. And for our viewers, thank you. We will be back next Thursday at 4 p.m. And that will be a presentation by Spencer Hill of Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. And he will be talking about sort of atmospheric changes, and he's going to be using sort of a rotating tank to show us our sort of how our atmosphere is constantly in motion, even though and things in our atmosphere and systems are always in motion, while we sit here in stillness. So join us next week, and if you have any questions about any of the sessions or this session, please feel free to contact me. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and stay safe.
Thanks, Cassie.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.